Welcome to Problem Solve, the podcast where me and a special co-host solve all your problems really easily, probably.
Problems? Are you kidding me? I don't have any problems. Okay, I might have a few, but I can work on them with you. Come on.
Hello, Dr. Nicole Kane. How are you doing?
I am living the dream. So happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm happy that you're here too. Can you introduce yourself to all the listeners?
Yes, my name's Dr. Nicole Kane. My passion is to help people heal from panic and anxiety. And I wrote a book called Panic Proof, and it comes out. It's my first book. It's coming out October 2024, and I'm thrilled and very grateful to be here having a conversation with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm happy you're here too. I love talking about anxiety. And I also think anxiety is the absolute worst. It sucks. And yeah, I've been a therapist for 20 years. And I think that like every single client I've ever had in the past 20 years, they always talk about anxiety in some form or another. And it's that being said, like anxiety, even though it can be really overwhelming, upsetting, and can hijack your system and can really like mess with your psyche and your everyday living. I would rather, as a therapist, treat anxiety than depression. There's like, although if like there's any clients out there that are talking to me about their depression, I love you and I love to treat that as well. But there's something like with anxiety, you can kind of like dig into it. And with depression, sometimes it's just so heavy. And there's like, you treat them in maybe like slightly different ways or in very different ways sometimes, depending on all the factors. But with anxiety, there's like, whenever I've treated it with clients, there's typically a lot to talk about.
Yes.
How long have you been helping people with anxiety?
Yeah, over a decade. I got my master's in clinical psychology and I was practicing as a counselor. And then when I got my medical degree, my practice started out as treating mostly bipolar disorder and schizophrenia. But what I was most passionate about with these individuals was helping with anxiety, which is this crisis. It mobilizes them. There's this surge of almost vital energy that we have such an awesome opportunity to leverage for power and healing. And I agree with what you're describing is sometimes depression can be much more difficult because for a lot of people, there's just so much collapse and you have to add energy to the system and motivation and hope to the system versus anxiety there can be a flop in anxiety, which can look like depression, but in many ways, anxiety, there's more to work with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you just sort of naturally found yourself being more interested in treating anxiety, and then you just go ahead.
More interested in it. But Jeff, my story is a story of a wounded healer.
Yeah, let's hear it.
It was 2015, and I was building an integrative practice, and in this model where I was the authority. And so people were coming to me and they're like, fix me, ideally as quickly as possible. Thank you. And
of course.
I was like, I got you, boo. We're here. We're going to figure out what your symptoms are telling you needs healing and how. We've got this. And all of that was working well until I had my anxiety rock bottom crisis, which started as a few days of no sleep. I don't know if you've ever had that where you're like going to bed at night and your brain is like, oh, wait, you didn't call that person back. Or, oh, shit, did I send that fax? Or, gosh, I'm really worried about Susie. I hope I said the right thing or I gave the right treatment or made the right referral. And then I was like, oh, did I bill this person? And I have to pay rent. And Sally Mae is breathing down my neck. And so what started as little whispers that were kind of a sleeping nuisance started to turn into screaming shouts. And I stopped sleeping. I was in a constant state of anxiety, autonomic arousal. And I had all of the tools. I was the person, the authority people came to, and nothing was working. I was taking, I don't know if your audience resonates with this, but I was taking herbs, supplements, doing functional testing. I saw a chiropractor. I did meditation, neurofeedback, yoga, breath work, vagus nerve hacks. I did all of the things I teach about. I even ended up taking antidepressants and benzodiazepines and then Ambien. And the pharmacist was like, girl, this combination this is bad. This could kill you, which made me more anxious, of course. And that rock bottom experience was a changing moment for me. And I think about, are you familiar with The Hero's Journey by Joseph Campbell?
Oh, vaguely.
A little bit.
Yeah.
He's how they based Star Wars or Community, the television show Community. Amazing, right? And so this is his monolith. And so he talks about this. And I think it really describes the human condition and the work that you do and the work that we do as healers and being healed ourselves, is that we're going through the motions and then we have an opportunity to say yes to the adventure. And in my rock bottom moment of anxiety, losing weight, lost my period, absolute terror, powerlessness, fear, my body is rebelling against me, is I had an opportunity to flop and give up and just accept that my life as I knew it was over, or say yes to the adventure. And I said yes. And what that looked like was really not what I expected. It was a complete unraveling of the messaging that I've been given about my body, about what anxiety is, what it isn't, what we do about it. And then in the hero's journey, so you say yes to the adventure, and then you go through a lot of garbage, a lot of crap. It's awful. You get a mentor. And I was blessed. I got mentors along the way. You do that for people. You mentor and you teach so many people. And then we receive a gift. And the gift can be wisdom or healing or love or whatever it is that is in our unique journey. And then we bring that journey back. And so that's where I am in my hero's journey. And I know we'll go through the loop again and again as we go through life. But where I am right now is what I learned as a clinician all those years, what I was really passionate and excited about, then experiencing from the dark circle of hell, and then learning a new way of understanding it, alchemizing and healing, and then bringing that back and writing this book and doing these podcasts, having these conversations. Yeah.
Yeah, that's quite a journey. Were you, when you were first starting to feel anxiety, and it sounds like it was manifesting maybe at night when you would try to go to sleep, which I feel like is a really common place for a lot of us to start. We turn the lights off and then we're just sort of alone with our thoughts once we put the phone down or stop watching a show or whatever it is. Were you like at that time and then on your journey, were you trying to get in touch with like, okay, why is this happening and where is this anxiety coming from? Were you able to kind of figure out if there was a root cause to these anxious thoughts?
Yeah. I was trying to find a root cause for the anxious thoughts. I was looking for the why, but the objective was to make it stop and to make it go away. And there's a little bit of nuance to that of, is anxiety a problem to be solved? When we're in it, it feels like it. It's one of the worst feelings that I could ever imagine. And looking at it as, this is my body, mind, nervous system, my entire experience. This is the solution to a deeper adaptation. And so when I pivoted that question ever so slightly to how do I solve the problem of anxiety, to how do I partner with anxiety so that I can understand better what it's trying to do for me,
Mm-hmm.
That's when the conversation shifted. And we can totally dive it a little bit more into that nuance if that would be interesting for you.
Yeah. I'm interested. I want to
You're like,
yeah,
actually,
keep on.
no.
No, I want to know. So it sounds like you started to try to like experience your anxiety in a different way by trying to understand like what your relationship with it was and have a different type of, I don't know, experience or connection with it. Is that right?
Absolutely. That's a great way of saying it. Is when we go through life, our clinicians, our doctors, our therapists, they want to relieve suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we go to them, they're like, okay, you have headaches, take aspirin or Tylenol.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you go to a holistic doctor and you have headaches, they may say, well, take white willow bark and some turmeric and drink more water.
Mm-hmm.
They look at the headaches as the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Similar with anxiety, right? So someone goes in, they go to their MD, they're like, okay, I'll give you an antidepressant, because we see that sometimes for some people that can help relieve anxiety. Mm-hmm. Or you may go to a talk therapist. And I'm trained as a talk therapist. My master's thesis was in CBT. So I love and appreciate it. Mm-hmm. But we want to shift the conversation ever so slightly to, well, here's why you shouldn't feel anxious or why it isn't logical, to, well, what is this an adaptation to? This is showing up here for a reason. This is here because at one point, this symptom, this conglomeration of symptoms were necessary for you. So being curious about that and befriending it. So it's a little bit of a pivot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the anxiety was there at some point in your past in order to serve you or protect you, get you through a difficult time or trauma or something. And so it sounds like you're wanting to, are you trying to have like compassion for that part of you? Are you trying to kind of be more gentle with that part of you? Are you like having almost like this dialogue with it in a way?
Yeah, absolutely. I love the idea of compassionate communication with our parts. Some people, I work with a lot of people who are really spicy, and that's the relationship that they want to have with their anxiety, and all vibes welcome. I talk about in my book, like that I'm I'm against the whole good vibes only thing. And so instead, all vibes welcome. And I have a patient that I was doing parts work with. It's like a ego state, internal family systems kind of a thing. And her anxiety showed up as this like superhero boxer woman that had like buzzed hair and was tattoo clad and like wore leather. And so if she went to that anxious part and was like really gentle and sweet with her, that anxious part would probably just like roll her eyes really hard, maybe punch her out and leave. And so in that dynamic, it's sort of like the leading edge we talk about in therapy is engaging with compassion. But I think respect is maybe a word that I could generalize is, what is that part? What is that part trying to tell you? What do you need? How do you relate with it?
And do you feel like if you don't start developing that relationship, then that anxiety part is just sort of running things and you're not aware of it and it's causing the tension and you're maybe just trying to kind of like put Band-Aids over it, distract yourself so that you don't have to dive into it and really understand it? Is that kind of what's going on?
I love your questions. Yes, this is like, I'm so happy because I'm like, you speak my language. It's so good. Have you heard of Carl Jung?
Sure. Yeah.
Of course you have. Yes.
Yeah.
So he teaches about what remains in our unconscious will continue to affect us in our daily lives, and we will call it fate. And so when we think about our underlying patterns, feelings, sensations, behaviors, drives, motivations, all of that that's playing underneath of the surface, if we aren't able, and we aren't given the tools and we don't have the space to look at that and acknowledge it and do an audit of that, then it may continue on autopilot and affect the way that you think and feel. And we've seen this in trauma-informed neuroscience. When we think about how our body, our mind, from the very moment that we come into this world, arguably before when we start thinking about how trauma can be inherited epigenetically, we come into this world and the developing brain is looking at everything that happens or doesn't happen. So thinking of adversity or neglect on each end of that spectrum. And it's making changes to help you adapt to be better able to survive in that. And so a metaphor, if I can share, is think about if you are, where are you at when you're doing this interview right now? Like what region of the country?
Portland, Oregon.
So it can get kind of cold there. I'm in Michigan right now. And I also split time in Arizona. So let's say that we're in the northern region hemisphere, right? And it's winter, it's January or February. It gets very cold. And so you adapt to that environmental experience by putting on a big fluffy coat. And so that adaptation, we've adapted to our environment, and that protects us and it keeps us safe. So we don't get frostbite and get too cold and grumpy. But then let's say we both go on vacation and we go to South America in the summer and it's very hot and the bugs are huge, right? And so we're still wearing that fluffy coat. Those adaptations have not continued to pivot and change, even though we're now in a warm climate. We're still wearing that coat. And so that's the metaphor for anxiety, where something that has been useful is stuck and our brain is reenacting, our body is reenacting the world stage. Everyone's our actors. We're replaying that. And what kept us alive and protected in the past is now creating suffering in the present. And so it's a totally, as you were saying, it's a totally different way of looking at it, right?
Yeah, it's a totally different way. And I think that, that's a really good metaphor in order to think of this situation. One of the problems that I see happening sometimes is that like that comfy down comforter coat that's been keeping you warm and has been working for so long, maybe your entire childhood or whatever it is. And now you're visiting other parts, warmer parts of the climate. You have to trust that like if you take it off, you're going to be okay. Either you won't have that layer of protection anymore, or you'll create a different type of layer of protection that's more suited and healthy for the climate or the condition that you're in now. But like to transfer from taking off that coat to not having anything, or creating a different type of layer of protection or whatever, that's an incredibly difficult thing to do. That feels scary. That feels vulnerable. A lot of times with my clients, if we're trying to make that transition, it can take weeks, months, years, depending on how protective that was or how scary it might feel to take that off and try something else on. Or they might want to be just like, fuck it, I'm living in the cold for the rest of my life. But even if it's not serving me, at least it feels familiar. There's something that actually kind of feels cozy or predictable about it, right? So there's this, and maybe like the coat will always be there in your neural pathways or whatever it is. So there's always like, I think ideally you would like to be able to like hang that coat up in your coat closet and deliberately open the closet when you feel like it's appropriate to use it. But it's also kind of like there on autopilot if you want it to be, right? But I feel like there's so much strength and courage that has to happen to let go of these old coats, coping mechanisms, whatever, in order to try on something else that's new. And they have to trust you, the clinician, or trust you, the author, if they're reading your book, or, and that's sometimes that's a really difficult, you have to like really work on that relationship with that client and let them know that you're safe and you get it. And maybe they like need to, they can use you as a place of comfort, transitionally or something. I don't know. I just wanted to say that like, I'm sure you're very aware of, that transition is a really scary one to make sometimes, right?
Yeah. I honor that. And that what I'm thinking about as you're saying that is how do we support that transition?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking about, sticking with the metaphor, is finding an alternative. So it's like, you don't have to be coatless, but we're going to go to the shops and we're going to find you something that's more useful for where you are now. And so I teach about starting to proactively reprogram those old programs, those old adaptations that are stuck, is starting the process of reprogramming it. So let's make this a little more concrete. So let's say that somebody has really bad agoraphobia. And so they struggle, they don't want to go out in public. I write about an individual, we call him Matthew in the book, who has terrible agoraphobia. And it started when he was a little guy and he was going to go on stage with his class to sing a little song. And he was having some digestive upset. He was experiencing a little bit of rumbling in his stomach. He was nervous. And so he told the teacher, hey, my tummy is upset. I don't want to go on stage. And she's like, you're going to be okay. We have to go up on stage now. And he ended up having a bowel accident.
Oh, no.
And it was so deeply traumatic. And everybody knew. And he was so embarrassed. And he felt so betrayed by his body. And so it started with that. And then his world got smaller and smaller. He became super hypersensitive to any churning or any gas in his tummy. If he felt any discomfort, he would need to be at home or in a place where he had a private bathroom stall. His world got smaller and smaller, right? And so the long-term goal is that I can take off this protective coat of having a small world and to go out and travel and not have to worry about where the bathrooms are. So that's like taking off the coat. But as you said, there's a big chasm between wearing a coat and like being in your boxers on the beach, right?
Right.
So the question is how do we start to bridge that gap before you force yourself into that? And so I'd love to share 4 steps, just break it down into 4 steps that we can start doing right now. So the first thing is that we want to start practicing onboarding our logical brain. And we can't do that until the body is calm. So this means we need to know a little bit of physiology with anxiety. And so when we become aroused or anxious, our logical brain gets essentially bypassed by the emotional brain. And that emotional brain, the amygdala, is going to set off a domino effect, causing the release of adrenaline, cortisol, stress hormones that put us into fight, flight, freeze, flop, fawn, fracture. Whoa, right. We can come back to that if we have time.
Wait, hold on. What is flop? I don't know if I've heard of flop before.
Flop is like have you ever heard of like when a sheep gets stuck on a fence and then they're like, I'm going to die. And so the farmer has to come detach the sheep and like force them to walk around for a while before they'll like realize it's not over.
Okay.
And so humans will do that. So their blood pressure will crash, their pulse rate will slow down, they'll go into a physiological flop.
Huh. Interesting.
I know.
Okay. Good to know.
Yeah. I call it F6, which is like a whole conversation. But in and of itself really valuable for people because they're like, well, I don't fight when I'm anxious and I don't freeze and I don't run away. I just feel like I completely dissociate, fracture, or I feel like I just like feel really vasovagally and I fall to the ground and I throw up and my blood pressure is really slow and I panic, well, flop.
Yeah. Well,
Right.
okay. But that's what I used to do when I was a kid. I would faint so much.
Yes.
Yeah. So it was whenever I thought I was gonna get hurt or someone around me was getting hurt, I'd get so scared and I would just like fall to the ground.
Yeah.
And then whenever I would feel really anxious for any reason, I'd like instantly feel really faint. And now, even as an adult, that's still there. Like I could still sometimes faint if all of the variables are incredibly anxious. I'll faint, and if it's really bad, I'll faint. I'll pee myself. I'll sweat like crazy, and then I'll just sort of like wake up 30 seconds later or something and be like, "Oh my god, like what happened?" So it was something that I really had to be thoughtful about. If I was ever a kid and I played a lot of sports and I saw somebody get hurt, I'd be like, oh no, I need to just lay down on the ground. Like I have to, prepare for this. You know what I mean? So I guess that was a flopper. Yeah.
That was a flop. And I imagine that was really scary and confusing. And we didn't have a lot of language for it. They're like, oh, you had a syncopal vasovagal attack. And you're like, what is that?
Yeah, I didn't know what was going on. And the adults around me weren't quite sure about what was going on too. I don't know. This was the 80s. And so it was just sort of like, get back up and start playing
Dust
again.
yourself off.
Yeah. But it was embarrassing. And sometimes I'd hurt my head if I would just like fall forward on the ground. Yeah, poor little me. But we're talking about how like the amygdala like literally like hijacks your brain so you can't think in like logical or practical ways. And it's kind of like panic, like something you need to survive somehow, right? So going back to your example with the client who used to be agoraphobic, you're trying to get him to kind of like move towards living in like a bigger space so he doesn't have to control his small space to feel safe.
Oh my gosh, that was the best summary. Thank you. Yes. So that very first step is now we know a little bit more about how the body can react when we're in an anxious state. And so what we want to practice doing, because the way we wire it is the way we'll fire it. So what we practice will over time, 90 to 120 days, will become more of a habit. So we're going to proactively practice these things so that when you need this most, it's going to be at the ready. So you want to practice grounding the body. So you're going to practice 4 square breath, where you inhale for 4 breath counts, you hold for 4 breath counts, exhale for 4, really good exhale, really hard exhale, like get it all out, squeeze your lungs, and then hold. So you can practice that, practically speaking, maybe twice a day. In the morning,
Are you saying you should practice that when you're feeling fine?
when you're feeling good?
Okay, so that you just sort of like know what that feels like, you're getting good and understanding how to do it. Okay.
Exactly. And any other strategies that feel really grounding for you. So another example is if we're having a meta experience, you and I have been having this conversation for about 20 minutes. And when we face forward, whether we're looking at the computer screen or at our phones or at a book, and we're not rotating our head or our eyes or neck or our shoulders, is the body positionally or interoceptively will perceive that as a freeze response. And so in response to being in a freeze response, even if we're just hanging out and having a great conversation, the body can put you into autonomic arousal. It can put you in fight, flight, freeze. So you may be just minding your own business, responding to emails, and then suddenly you're like, why am I so stressed? Right? So something else that you can do in addition to practicing practically breathing is rotating. So this is, I call this the SN hack. It takes like no time at all. And so this is going to reprogram the brain to get out of that danger spiral that it's going into just by your position. And so periodically throughout the day, You exhale and you rotate your head and your eyes and look over one shoulder. And then you rotate the other direction with your head and your eyes, look over the other shoulder, and then you focus your gaze on something far, and then you focus back close.
Mm-hmm.
So start practicing that. And then have a docket of other strategies. And so there's the 3-3-3 rule, which probably a lot of people in your audience have heard of, is just practice mindfully when you're out and about instead of like scrolling while you're on a walk or scrolling when you're in the car as a passenger or a driver. Just mindlessly, right? Is just practice. I see these 3 things. I hear these 3 things. I could even touch these 3 things. And so this is practicing using grounding mindfulness skills. So that's something that we had Matthew start doing, is just, I want you to practice just using skills to get you back in your body, even when you're just chill and you're at home. Just practice these things.
So you're not telling him like go out into the world and start to feel anxious and then use these
Not
tools.
yet.
You're saying, okay, practice them when you're cozy at home.
Yep, when you're cozy at home. Yes.
Okay.
So now that he's rocked step 1, we're going to go to step 2. Step 2 of 4. So step 2 is, now that we've calmed the brain or practiced strategies to calm the brain, we have access to our logical brain again. And so this is when you get to rock and roll, strengthening your logical brain, because the more that we can reinforce connections to the prefrontal cortex, the more accessible that will be. And so people who spend a lot of time zoning out or dissociating or just not really challenging themselves. For example, if you have a very boring job, you just make sandwiches all day and you just like go into the happy Eggo waffle hole in your brain and just like sit there and you're in your... So what we want to do in step 2 is practice creating those synaptic connections to your prefrontal cortex. And so this could be anxiety specific. This could be learning about anxiety, could be going to talk therapy, doing the top down of what are my coping skills, what are the dialectics, like from dialectical behavioral therapy. It could be doing Sudoku or reading a book that's challenging, doing brain puzzles, anything to start reinforcing. Because right now we're just building a bridge. We're not even driving across it yet. We're building a bridge. So spend 10 minutes a day doing something intellectually challenging. And then we have step 3. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Step 3 is when we bridge the gap between the brain and the body. And so this is important. So if you're listening to this conversation and you have ever felt like your body is just going haywire on you, your heart is pounding, you feel restless, you feel like you're losing feeling in the left side of your face, you feel like passing out, and your body's just going haywire on you. But logically, you're like, what's the deal? We're fine, right?
Right.
So this is a sign that there may be a lack or maybe an insufficient amount of integration between mind and body. They're not flowing in attunement. And so we want to practice that, because your body is going to be communicating with you all the time. In fact, here's a little fun aside, is that your vagus nerve is the communication between the gut and the brain. And research has suggested that your gut is doing 80% of the talking. And so your body has a lot to say. And so when we practice interoceptive awareness, or awareness of what's happening in the body with a mindfully onboarded prefrontal cortex, then when the body starts whispering data about like, ooh, we're getting a little stressed right now, you will notice that and be able to take action before you go into a full-fledged panic. And you described that with your stories. If somebody gets hurt in the distance, instead of you waiting for your body to flop you over, you know, I need to distance myself or lay down. So you've done that work to create that bridge between the mind and the body, right?
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so step 4. You were going to say something. I want to hear what you were going to say.
No, I want you to continue to bring it back to Matthew a little bit. So Matthew learns how to ground himself. It was step 1, and by doing the exercises, whether 3-3-3 or breathing 4-4-4, and then step 2 is kind of like deliberately getting in touch with like your logical, rational
Yeah.
prefrontal cortex, practical. So like doing Sudoku or whatever,
Yeah.
the New York Times games that they have,
Yeah.
like the word games and stuff, or a fun like puzzle on your phone or whatever it is. And then, so I can see him like doing those, practicing those things. How does he do step 3? What does that look like for him specifically?
Yeah, he would do a body scan
Mm-hmm.
while he was brushing his teeth. So in the morning, he had a Post-it note on his mirror. It said body scan because he was so hyper vigilant, noticing his body and having to do something about it, that he was fixated on his tummy. He was fixated on his bowels and his gut. That it was very black or white. Like he had no idea what was happening elsewhere. He didn't notice if his jaw was tense. He didn't notice if he was having racing thoughts. He was just like, ooh, was that a gas bubble?
Right.
And then this urgency to make it stop. And so in this step, we were just focusing on noticing the body without the need to do anything about it and holding space for the body communicating. And that's a really important factor with anxiety, is that if we don't feel it, if we don't allow it to express itself, it's just going to get worse. It's just going to get louder and louder, oftentimes for people. And so he was practicing noticing it. So he would start at the bottom of his feet while he's brushing his teeth, just notice any sensations without judgment. And then he would work his way up his body. And that's where we had to start, is just like, I'm simply going to be present in my body and breathe and do the grounding techniques if there's anything that feels kind of funny or scary. And we're just going to notice it for just a couple of minutes while we brush our teeth.
Yeah, it's great because brushing your teeth is incredibly boring and I want to get it over with as fast as I can. Sometimes I take just a little tour of my bedroom while I'm brushing my teeth and I can't stand it. So it's nice to have something to maybe do to replace that with. And so when you're doing the body scan, starting from your toes going all the way up to your head, are you like feeling the energy like in each part of your body? Are you kind of like feeling the physical sensation? Like, do I feel strong? Do I feel pain? Do I feel like, am I getting any sort of like messages here? Are there like questions that you should ask yourself, or is it just like energetically I'm going from bottom to top?
You're taking this and you're 10xing it. I like this.
Okay.
This is super good. So let's say that you're like, oh my gosh, this is super basic. I've done all this work. Like, let's make this body scan like really informative. And so I like to use this as an inroad because the body tells us. And so let's say that you're like sitting in your room and you're like, okay, I got 30 minutes. I'm going to do the body scan and I want it to inform me about deeper healing. I want it to inform me about those coats that I have on. So let's say, okay, I am doing a body scan, and let's say we stick with Matthew, which he did this, but it was much later in the work that we were doing because we just had to just get him back in his body. But later in the work, what he did, actually, I'm going to give you a better example. This is in the book too. This is Esme. And I think hers was really powerful. And so she did the body scan, and Esme she's like in her 20s, and she's very, very spicy, very sassy. And she has really awful anxiety and polycystic ovarian syndrome. So she had horrible menstrual cramps. She burst cysts. It was terrible. She liked to call her uterus a sadistic organ that was out to make her miserable.
Wow. Okay.
So she wanted to cut it out and just not have anything to do with it. And so doing the body scan, she wanted to just whoop right past that because it gave her lots of scary information. But when we did this exercise, we did this together on a call. And so she was noticing her belly. She was noticing the area of her uterus. And I asked her to describe any thoughts, feelings, sensations, or urges that came up with that. And she said, I feel anxiety when I notice that. I said, okay, what is the sensation? She said, it's like cramping, stabbing. I feel anxious. And so then we noticed anything else. And so then what we did is we followed it down the timeline and said, okay, So close your eyes, go into that space, and then I want you to imagine going down the timeline, going into your past, and see if you can identify the first time that you felt that way.
Mm-hmm.
And she's doing tapping. So we had her do the butterfly hug. She's doing tapping bilateral left and right. And she says, I have a memory of when I was a little girl, my mom, my brother, and I had escaped my father. We went to Vietnam and we were hiding from him.
Mm-hmm.
And in the memory that came up for her, he had burst in the door and there was an altercation, and she was under the table and she started screaming at the top of her lungs. And she told me, she's like, I don't know why I did that. I just screamed. And he came and he kicked her right in the gut.
Mm-hmm.
And that process of listening to what the body had to say, the symptoms in her gut, and for her doing that child inner trauma work was the most effective thing for healing the symptoms that she experienced in her gut. And we've seen this in the research into EMDR, how people can present with physical symptoms that get better when doing the trauma work. And so that's an example of how that body scan can be 10x'd to actually help us access opportunities for deeper healing. So that symptom of gut anxiety was her body's code. It was holding on to it, was remembering it. It was tense. It was producing inflammatory cells. Arguably, there could be other sequelae, maybe hormonally. You know, we can't do a double-blind study trial on that, but that did all get objectively better when she did that work. And so body scan, brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, body scans can be incredibly informative and also really healing if you're, you know, especially if you're like working with somebody or being really thoughtful about it, and also really scary. I think that a lot of times we do a body scan and just kind of quickly go through it and you're like, cool, I'm done. And maybe you didn't like collect much info or it didn't have that big of an impact, but that's where you're starting. And then you can eventually be a little bit slower or more deliberate or more curious or inquisitive or, you know, trying to ask yourself these questions of when did I first feel this, or how has it protected me in the past, whatever. There's so much information that you can collect when you do a body scan, and creating time during the day or a few times a week in order to be there with yourself. It can be life-changing, possibly, and but it's. I feel like it's something that that's not something that anybody maybe really typically does. If you just have a normal day, you're not sitting there for a little while doing a body scan. Maybe if you have a meditation practice or something, or you build in some sort of stillness exercise. But yeah, and I think that just having a really hectic normal day is maybe you protecting yourself from going a little deeper and figuring out what that information is, because that protective coat from a long time ago, like we said, while it maybe was serving you before, there's still a part of you that thinks that that's probably the best way to cope with your anxiety currently, when that's not actually the case.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I like having people start, and why I had Matthew just start while you're brushing your teeth, because he wasn't where Esme was. And that work for him came much later. And so it's like, how can we make it bite-sized and accessible to just start reprogramming that interoceptive awareness? And then that prepares us for step 4, which I think is one of the most important steps. And I see this often skipped.
Let's hear it.
Let's hear it. So step 4 is when we go in and we start teaching ourselves how to become aroused and to come out of it. Because in life, we will experience stress. Stress is what it means to be human. But the practicing and learning how to go into autonomic arousal, that fight, flight, freeze, etc., knowing how to go into that and then how to reliably bring yourself out of that creates, number 1, a sense of personal power, which is the antidote to anxiety, is having power and agency and knowing what to do if stress strikes, no matter where you are. And that comes from practicing it again and again and again. But we want to do it in a way that is objectively safe and where you're in control. And so I'm not asking Matt in this step to go to the beach and to be as far away from a bathroom as possible. Mm-hmm. What I am asking him to do is more of a, like we call it systematic desensitization. Mm-hmm. And so what that means for the non-clinicians listening to this conversation is we want to gently expand your window of tolerance, gently expand your ability to feel activated and able to come down. So what does this mean practically? So number one is you want to do things that feel a little bit stressful, a little bit activating. So I use the example of a high ropes course quite often, where you go up on the high ropes course. It's high. It's objectively kind of freaky, depending on if you have a penchant for fear of heights. And then you have the control to be like, I'm going to stand here in my power for 30 seconds, and then I'm going to get down, and then I'm going to breathe, get back to my body, and then you're going to do it again. Other people may practice this process with yoga, where they go into a difficult pose, difficult for them, which we all have our varying levels of skill. So I'll give one example. It could be different for anybody, but maybe you're going into like a proud warrior pose and you're holding your arms out and your heart is beating faster. You feel it in your chest. Your body temperature is rising. You're sweating all over the place. And your brain is like, I can't do this anymore. And then the teacher says, just one more breath. And then you come out of it, and you can come out of it before that breath, or whenever you choose to, or you can do that breath, or maybe you hold it just a little longer after they say you can come out of it. It's about, I go into it, and in my own personal control, I come out of it. And so you practice that, all 4 of these steps for 90 to 120 days, so that when stress strikes, that you've been practicing this, you know how to do it, because your prefrontal cortex, until you online it, it's not going to remind you, oh yeah, you got to breathe, you got to do this thing. It's got to be habit. It's got to be ingrained. So those are the 4 steps that you do before you take off that coat and go to the beach.
I like it. And I think one of the ways that sometimes I can create stress in my body in order to practice step number 4 is, I haven't done this in a while, but like if I just breathe through a straw and I'm only able to like get in and out that like little bit of breath, then all of a sudden my body starts to panic. And it's nice because I can just take the straw away and then like I can like really, but it feels like I'm in control. I'm the one who's creating like the shortness of breath, and all of a sudden my body starts to react, and then I can just take it away and I can, extend that as long as I want to. So it is the most important step. It's like learning 1, 2, and 3 are incredibly important, but then you have to put all those things into action by practicing it. And then would you like, I guess I would imagine with Matthew, you're still maybe not sending him all the way to the furthest end of the world with no toilet access. You're kind of like slowly getting there. And that might take a little while, right? Yeah.
For cases as severe as his, we spent 90 days just doing 1 through 4.
Yeah.
In terms of his homework. The other thing that adds a layer of complexity that I address in so much more detail in the book is that the coat, it's an adaptive system that takes place head to toe. And so that means that our gut microbiome has adapted to keep us in stress. And so we have to go in and we have to fix those microbiome feedback loops so that they're not an obstacle to cure. And our immune system has adapted to keep us in a state of stress. And so we were also doing work with his immune system. And so in addition to the thoughts, the behaviors, the nervous system, is we want to look at the rest of the body and make sure that it's getting that healing that it needs. And so it's a beautiful marriage of mind, body, spirit, behaviors, habits, environment to allow us to actually heal. Because in actual healing, we don't need to have anxiety. We may feel stress, we may feel agitation, human emotions, but anxiety is a little bit different in that it's this arousal paired with a feeling of powerlessness. And so if we've actually healed the brain and the body and continue on doing that maintenance work, then we can come out, we could pull that coat out of the closet with our own sense of power and agency. But it's not happening without our control. It's not happening involuntarily.
Yeah. And that's the part, if and when you get to that spot that feels incredibly powerful and strong and liberating, right? Because you're the one that has that gets the control back. You're the one that gets to decide which coat you're going to pull out instead of it being strapped to your body without even knowing it in the first place. Yeah. All that being said, there's no problem. I love living in Portland, Oregon, and I never want to leave. It's very cozy weather. We're getting the clouds. We're entering into the rainy season for the next 7 to 8 months, and I'm totally fine with that.
You're here for it.
I'm here for it. I love it. And I get to wear the coziest clothes, all my flannels and layers. It's perfect for me.
Yes. Yeah. And I feel that way about Michigan half the year. And then I go to Arizona. Yeah.
Yeah. I
but
get it.
I've heard that Portland is the best. So I gotta get my way out there.
It is. It is the best. Yeah. Portland, the Pacific Northwest, Seattle also is really great. We're a little better than Seattle. But still Seattle is fantastic to be around. Yeah. I had a bunch of questions for you, and I didn't ask any of them because we just sort of went on this tangent that I thought was a lot more interesting, and I think gives people a really good sneak preview of what they can learn from you in your book. And it sounds like there's so much more extra learning in your book, so I would recommend anyone to get it. When does it come out again?
October 8th is when it comes out.
October 8th. Yeah. So that's
right
today.
Now. Yeah.
So you can buy it now.
Yes.
That's exciting. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it. Where can people find you if they just want to look you up on social media?
Yeah, I would love to hang out on social media. My Instagram is Dr. Nicole Kane. And so come find me. I respond to messages and I follow you. And so they can find me just by clicking on who's following you.
There you go. All right. It was so good having you on. This was so helpful and very practical advice. I love it. I'll talk to you later.
Thank you so much, Jeff.